Now, the armed Scotland Yard officer who was cleared of murdering violent gangster Chris Kaba now faces a gross misconduct disciplinary over the shooting and could be sacked. The specialist shot dead Chris Kaba in September 2022 after Chris drove at officers in an attempt to smash his way out of a police roadblock. Well, joining me now in the studio is GBNews' security editor, Mark White. Mark, what more can you tell us about this story?
Well, I think the reaction now that's coming in from members of the police service is one of anger. I think there would be a great deal of concern that armed police officers in particular who do this voluntarily, they don't get paid extra for it, and they take on an enormous responsibility in having to carry a firearm. If ever they're forced to use that, make a split-second decision, they could find themselves in the same kind of shape as this officer who, of course, has had to go through the ordeal of a murder trial where he was acquitted by a jury quickly after the conclusion of that particular trial process, but now, of course, finds himself facing a gross misconduct hearing. And the concern is, I think, amongst police forces across the country, is that many armed officers might just feel now it's simply not worth carrying a firearm, knowing that if they have to make that decision, that it could be hanging over them for not just months, but for years, could be potentially career-ending. Even worse, they could lose their liberty as a result of it. Now, we've had some reaction from the Metropolitan Police Federation, from Matt Kane, who is the Secretary General of the Met Police Federation. He said, "Police officers should not have their livelihoods or liberty put at risk for performing what unequivocally, as has been found in court of law, is their lawful and appropriate function. And yet, putting this brave officer on trial for murder, as astonishing as that was not enough for the IOPC. Being cleared unanimously by a jury who heard all the evidence was not enough for the IOPC. They have now decided to put him and his family through more torment." And that statement concludes by saying, "We will vigorously defend the actions of this officer in any misconduct proceedings. This, as they say, is not accountability. It's not in the public interest. This is not right or fair or just." And I think the Police Federation there really echoing the views of police officers right across the country, and what they see is the mistreatment of this officer for simply doing his job in very difficult and trying circumstances.
Mark White, thank you very much. Right, still here is GBNews' senior political commentator Nigel Nelson, and also in the studio is former Scotland Yard detective Peter Bleksley. Peter, what do you think when you hear this?
The Independent Office of Police Conduct is a largely discredited organisation which isn't independent. And in this situation here, it has bowed to a baying mob. It has acted vindictively, perniciously, and this gross misconduct hearing that NX121 will now face is utterly appalling.
Well, he has been cleared of murder, so why does he now need to go through something else? Surely that should be drawing a line over it. And the other thing is, of course, the judge named him, which was absurd. Why would they do that?
And we won't be doing that.
No.
But NX121's actions that night, when he pulled the trigger and fired that fatal shot, and everything leading up to that, has been examined by a jury in the minutest of detail. The IOPC and the CPS, in their desperation to try and nail a firearms officer for a crime that they hadn't committed, was shown to be abysmal. The jury, not only did they deliver their verdict swiftly and conclusively, they wrote a letter to the judge. And I know somebody who's seen that letter, which the judge would not make public. And in that letter, the jury lambasted the CPS and the IOPC for ever sticking this officer on trial. And now he, his family, everybody who loves him is going to have to go through the ordeal of a gross misconduct hearing. This is not process. This is abuse.
Nigel Nelson, would you concur with that?
Largely, I'd go along with Peter there. I find it astonishing that if a jury makes a decision and finds someone innocent, that should be the end of it. So where this case started, that either you decide to go for a charge of murder, which is what happened in this case, or you go for a lower charge of gross misconduct, which the IOPC would do. What I find astonishing is you do both. So because the first one falls, the murder charge falls, now he gets charged with gross misconduct, and when all you're going to hear is exactly the same evidence you would have heard at trial. And when you hear that evidence and where you get other officers who were there who say that if he hadn't taken that shot, these other officers would have done, makes you wonder why you need this second hearing.
Well, Peter, who will protect this officer now, though? Because if there's gross misconduct, and just say for one ridiculous moment that he is found guilty of that, then he's on his own, isn't he?
I'm not even going to go there, but to answer the first part of your question, the Police Federation will defend NX 121 at this police disciplinary hearing robustly, like they did at the trial at the Old Bailey. He will have the best legal minds on his side, and rightfully so. This police discipline hearing, we have heard by the Met, is going to be chaired probably by a chief constable from somewhere else in the country. But once again, I hesitate not to say this is not due process. This is an abuse of process, and it is fundamentally wrong on every level.
What about the judge who named him? Is there any comeback on that judge? Because I know people were saying that they wanted the judge to be named, but where are we with that?
No, and that judge made his decision, and NX 121 stood trial in his real name, something that I'm sure aggrieved many people. But the end of that Old Bailey trial, with every scrap of evidence, every witness being cross-examined, every lead-up to the event, the pulling of the trigger and subsequent events were examined in the minutest of detail and cross-examined. And for this situation to be arrived at today is a stain on this nation and a disgrace to anybody who's played a part in getting us to this point.
All right, thank you very much. Former Scotland Yard detective Peter Bleksley, thank you for your thoughts. Of course, Nigel Wall was staying with me. The director of the Independent Office of Police Conduct, Amanda Rose, said, "This is a decision we've taken based on examining all the evidence. We appreciate that the Home Office is carrying out a review of the legal test for the use of force in misconduct cases. However, we must apply the law as it currently stands."